This is the story of a young woman whose life was turned upside down by a single dollar and the man who found it. Her name was Savannah. She was a young black woman with big, warm brown eyes and a smile that could light up a room, even when she didn't feel like it. She had rich, dark skin and wore her hair in a neat ponytail that always had a few curls trying to escape. Her dressing was simple and tidy, the kind of clothes that were clean and well-kept but clearly didn't cost much. Life hadn't been easy for Savannah. She'd been raised by her grandmother, a strict but loving woman who taught her the value of hard work and kindness. Her grandma had passed away a few months ago, and with her gone, Savannah had to learn to stand on her own 2 feet in the big city of Chicago, where she had moved to from a small town in Mississippi. She had a good job as a junior accountant at a big, important company called Tech Nova. It wasn't her dream job, but it was a good start, and it paid the bills. Or at least it did until this morning. Savannah sat on the bus, staring out the window at the city passing by. The bus was old and smelled of stale air and faint perfume. The seats were worn, and the ride was bumpy. But today, the bumps didn't bother her. She felt like her whole world was a bumpy, out-of-control ride. Her hands trembled a little as she thought about what had just happened. She had been called into her boss's office, a man named Mr. Harrison, a thin, tense man with a permanent frown. He told her that due to restructuring, her position was no longer needed. She was fired just like that. She had asked him to reconsider, to please give her another chance. But he just shook his head and looked away. So here she was, on her way home with just $1 in her pocket. It was her very last one. She had paid her rent and her bills, bought what little groceries she needed for the week, and this $1 was all that was left until her next paycheck, which would never come. She felt a lump in her throat as she reached into her pocket to feel the worn-out bill. It was a comfort, a small piece of security, even if it couldn't buy much. When the bus stopped at her station, she stood up slowly and made her way to the door. Her mind was so cloudy she didn't notice the big, important-looking man in a fancy suit who also got up to leave at the same stop. He was a white man, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp, serious gray eyes and hair that was starting to show a little silver at the temples. His name was Julian Thorne, but Savannah didn't know that. She only saw a man who looked like he had never had a problem in his life. He was the kind of man who owned the world, while she was a woman who had just lost hers. As she stepped off the bus, the single precious dollar bill slipped from her hand without her noticing. It floated through the air for a second before landing softly on the ground. Julian, who was right behind her, saw it. He looked at the dollar, then at her, walking away with her head down. He knew that look, the look of a person weighed down by the world. It was a look he hadn't seen in a long time. He bent down and picked up the dollar. He wanted to call out to her, but she was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd. He stood there for a moment, a single dollar in his hand, wondering about the young woman who had lost it. He didn't know it yet, but that dollar and the woman who lost it would change everything for him. If you're enjoying this story, please show some love by hitting the like button and subscribing. It helps us know you want more stories like this. He didn't think much of it at first. It was just $1. He had thousands of them, millions even. Julian Thorne was the CEO of Tech Nova, the very company that had just let Savannah go. He was a man who had built his empire from nothing, but somewhere along the way he had forgotten what nothing felt like. He had forgotten the feeling of every dollar counting. He put the dollar in his coat pocket and went to his waiting black SUV. His driver, a kind man named Arthur with a neatly trimmed gray beard, was waiting for him. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," Arthur said, holding the door open. "Morning, Arthur," Julian said, his voice deep and a little tired. He sat in the back seat, the plush leather soft beneath him. He looked out the tinted window, watching the world go by. People rushing to their jobs, some smiling, some with that same heavy look Savannah had on her face. He thought about the restructuring he had ordered. It was just a number on a spreadsheet to him, a way to make the company more efficient. He never saw the faces behind the names on the list. That evening, Julian was at home in his huge, modern apartment high above the city. The place was all glass and steel, with furniture that looked more like art than something you could sit on. He was eating a fancy dinner prepared by his housekeeper, a woman named Maria, a kind lady from Mexico who always had a smile for him. But even with all the luxury, he felt a strange emptiness. He was a rich man, but he was a lonely man. His wife had passed away a few years ago, and his son, Michael, was grown and lived on the other side of the country. He was going through his mail when he felt something crinkly in his coat pocket. He pulled it out. It was the dollar bill from the bus. He held it in his hand, looking at the familiar face of George Washington. It was a simple piece of paper, but it felt heavy in his hand. He found himself thinking about the girl again. He wondered what her story was. Why did a single dollar mean so much to her? Julian found himself feeling a strange pull to that dollar. It was like a little mystery he needed to solve. He decided to do something he hadn't done in years. He called his head of human resources, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Brenda. "Brenda, it's Julian. I need you to pull up the file of all the employees we let go today," he said. "Sir, that's a long list. Is there a name you're looking for?" Brenda asked, her voice sounding surprised. It wasn't like Julian to care about things like this. "No, I just want to see the list. I'll call you back with a name if I find it," he said, and hung up. Savannah's day was much different. She was at home in her small, one-bedroom apartment. The apartment was cozy, with pictures of her and her grandma on the walls. The air smelled of fried chicken and rice from the dinner she had just finished. She had spent the rest of her day looking for new jobs online, but nothing was coming up. The internet was slow, and her hope was getting even slower. She had a little money left, but it was for an emergency, not for a train ticket or anything extra. She felt like she was drowning. She sat on her sofa, her head in her hands, and let a few tears fall. She was so tired of fighting, so tired of struggling. She missed her grandma. She wished she had someone to talk to tell her everything was going to be okay. But she was alone. Meanwhile, Julian was looking at the list of fired employees. It was a long list. He scrolled through it, name after name, face after face. He was looking for her, the girl from the bus. He didn't know her name, but he was sure he would know her face. And then he saw it. A picture of a beautiful young black woman with warm brown eyes. Her name was Savannah Jenkins. Under her picture, it said junior accountant. A wave of regret washed over him. He had fired her. He had taken her last dollar. Felt like a cruel joke. He looked at the dollar in his hand, then at her picture on his computer screen. He knew what he had to do. He had to give her back her dollar and much more. Julian didn't hesitate. The next morning he called Brenda again. "I found the name. Savannah Jenkins. I need her contact information and her home address." Brenda was stunned. "Mr. Thorne, you know we can't just give out employee information like that." "Brenda," he said, his voice firm but not angry. "I'm the CEO. I can. This is important. Do it." She knew his tone. When Julian Thorne made up his mind, there was no arguing. She gave him the information, and he hung up the phone. He looked at the address. It was a modest part of the city, a quiet street with small apartment buildings. He knew his driver, Arthur, would ask questions, but he didn't care. "Arthur," he said as he got into the SUV, "I need you to take me to this address. And please, don't ask any questions." Meanwhile, Savannah's day was even worse than the last one. She sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her laptop. Every job application she had sent out seemed to come back with the same message. "Thank you for your interest. We've decided to move forward with other candidates." Felt like a punch to the gut every time she read it. The hope she had been holding on to was slowly draining away, replaced by a cold fear. How would she pay next month's rent? What would she do? She closed the laptop, a single tear rolling down her cheek. She was hungry, but she knew she had to be careful with the last of her groceries. She got up and walked over to her window, looking out at the street below. A fancy black SUV pulled up and parked across the street. A tall, distinguished-looking white man in a suit got out of the back. She squinted, trying to get a better look. He looked familiar, but she couldn't place him. She just thought he was lost, maybe looking for a different building. Julian got out of the car, feeling a strange mix of nerves and purpose. He had never done anything like this before. The dollar bill was still in his pocket, a small reminder of his mission. He looked up at the building, found the number, and walked towards the entrance. He felt a little out of place in his expensive suit on this simple, quiet street. He found her apartment number and took a deep breath before knocking. Savannah's heart jumped. Who could that be? She wasn't expecting anyone. She looked through the peephole and saw him. The man from the bus stop. The man in the fancy suit. She slowly opened the door a crack, her hand still on the knob. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice small. Julian looked at her, and she was even more beautiful up close. Her eyes were wide with confusion, and he could see a trace of sadness in them. "Savannah Jenkins?" he asked. "Yes," she answered, her eyebrows furrowed. "Do I know you?" "I don't think so," he said with a little smile. "But I have something that belongs to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled dollar bill. Savannah's eyes widened. She stared at the dollar, then back at him. My dollar," she whispered, the last dollar she had in the world. "Yes," Julian said, holding it out to her. "You dropped it on the bus yesterday. I tried to get your attention, but you were already gone." "But how did you find me?" she asked, still in shock. Julian hesitated for a moment. This was the hard part. He put the dollar back in his pocket and looked her in the eye. "Savannah, my name is Julian Thorne. I'm the CEO of Tech Nova." The words hit her like a wave. Her face went pale. Her heart pounded in her chest. The man who had fired her, the man who had taken her last shred of hope, was standing on her doorstep, holding her last dollar. A wave of anger and humiliation rushed through her. You're him," she said, her voice shaking. "You're the reason I lost my job. You're the one who signed the papers." "I am," he said, his voice soft, "and I want to fix my mistake." He looked at her, not as a boss to an employee, but as one person to another. "I didn't know the faces behind the names on those papers. I lost sight of what mattered. But that dollar, it made me remember what it was like to count every penny." He pulled out the dollar again and handed it to her, but he didn't let go of her hand. "Savannah, I'm here to offer you your job back. Not as a junior accountant, but as my personal financial assistant. You'd be working directly for me. The pay will be 5 times what you were making. This isn't charity. I need someone who understands the value of a dollar. I need you." Savannah's mind was reeling. A few moments ago, she was crying, hopeless. Now, the man who had fired her was offering her a new life, a new beginning. She looked from his serious, kind gray eyes to the dollar in her hand. It wasn't just a dollar anymore. It was a second chance. A chance to go from crying to smiling. She took a shaky breath and looked at him. She saw not a cruel CEO, but a man who had made a mistake and was now trying to fix it. The hope she had lost slowly, surely, began to return. Savannah's mind was a whirlwind. A few seconds ago, she was lost, hopeless, and alone. Now she had a second chance standing right in front of her. She looked at Julian, at the dollar, and then at her small apartment. She took a deep breath. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice steadying. I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," he said simply. "I know this is a lot, but I'm not a cruel man. I had forgotten what it was like for a person like you. This is a chance for me to learn and for you to have the life you deserve." Savannah's heart softened. She saw the sincerity in his eyes. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." A small, hopeful smile touched her lips. A few days later, Savannah walked into the Tech Nova headquarters. The building was a tower of glass and steel. It was the same place where she had been fired, but it felt completely different now. The reception area was huge and bright, with fancy lights and modern art. She felt small and a little overwhelmed in her simple, dark blue dress. She was met by Brenda, the head of HR. Brenda was a tall, serious woman with short, sharp blonde hair and a professional suit. She looked at Savannah as if she were a puzzle she couldn't figure out. "Savannah," she said, her voice clipped. "Mr. Thorne is waiting for you." His office is on the top floor. Savannah rode the elevator up, her stomach fluttering. When the doors opened, she stepped into an office that took her breath away. The whole floor was a huge, open space with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire city. And in the middle of it all was Julian's office, a glass-walled room with a massive mahogany desk. He looked up from his computer and smiled warmly when he saw her. "Welcome, Savannah," he said, getting up to shake her hand. "Come in. Your new desk is right here." He gestured to a beautiful desk just outside his office. "You'll be my personal assistant. You'll manage my calendar, my meetings, and help me with my personal finances." He handed her a large envelope. "And this is for you. A new work wardrobe. You're going to be meeting a lot of important people, and I want you to feel confident." Savannah opened the envelope and found a gift card for an expensive clothing store. She was speechless. "Mr. Thorne, this is too much." "Nonsense," he said, his smile genuine. "This is just a small start." Over the next few weeks, Savannah thrived. She was smart, organized, and a quick learner. She quickly picked up on Julian's needs and habits, anticipating his requests before he even made them. She saw that Julian wasn't the cold, calculating billionaire she had imagined. He was a lonely man, a widower who worked too much and ate alone in his big apartment. He often asked her about her life, her family, and her dreams. He even started telling her about his own life, his late wife, and his son. Their professional relationship began to feel more like a friendship. One afternoon, Julian was on the phone with his old friend and board member, a man named Marcus. "Yes, the new assistant is working out wonderfully," Julian said, looking at Savannah with a proud smile. "She's sharp, she's honest, and she has a real understanding of money. A different kind of understanding than the MBA's. But not everyone was happy. Mr. Harrison, Savannah's old boss, saw her in the hallway one day and his face went red with anger. He had been passed over for a promotion and couldn't stand that the woman he had fired was now working directly for the CEO. He saw her as a threat, a reminder of his own failure. He began to watch her, looking for any mistake he could use to get her fired for good. He saw her smiling as she talked to Julian in the hallway, and a wave of jealousy washed over him. He started whispering to other managers, making up stories about how Savannah was just a charity case, a pet project for the lonely boss. He believed that if he could just get her out of the picture, he would be back in the CEO's good graces. Mr. Harrison's jealousy turned into a cold, ugly plan. He knew he couldn't just get Savannah fired for no reason. He needed to make it look like her fault. He spent a few days using an old company computer to create a fake paper trail. He wrote emails that looked like they were from Savannah, sending Tech Nova's financial information to a fake personal email address. He even put together a spreadsheet full of made-up numbers that seemed to show Savannah was stealing from the company. It was a cruel and careful lie. He waited for the right moment. One morning, when Julian was looking a little tired and distracted, Mr. Harrison walked into his office without an appointment. "Julian, I'm so sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice full of fake concern. "But I have some deeply troubling information." He laid the file on Julian's desk. "I've been noticing some unusual activity," he said, tapping the fake documents. "I've tried to handle it myself, but I think you need to see this. It looks like Savannah has been stealing from the company." Julian's face went pale. He picked up the documents and looked at them. They looked real. His heart sank. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence seemed so clear. He looked up at Mr. Harrison, who was watching him with a smug, satisfied expression. "Are you sure about this?" Julian asked, his voice low. "I wish I wasn't," Mr. Harrison said, shaking his head sadly. "But it's all here. She's been a problem from the start." Julian didn't say another word. He just nodded, and Mr. Harrison left the office, a small smile on his face. When Savannah came back from getting coffee, she noticed the cold silence in the office. Julian's door was closed, which was unusual. A few minutes later, he called her in. His face was serious and he didn't smile. "Savannah," he said, his voice flat, "I need to ask you about this." He slid the fake papers across the desk to her. Savannah's eyes went wide as she read them. Her hands started to tremble. The words on the page were lies, but they looked so real. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't true. I've never seen these before. I would never do something like this." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Please, you have to believe me." Julian looked at her face, at the pure shock and hurt in her eyes. He saw the same honest girl who had a single dollar in her pocket. He remembered the feeling of that worn bill in his hand. He looked at the papers and then back at her. The papers were just numbers on a page, but Savannah was a real person, full of emotion and truth. "I do believe you," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I've made mistakes before, but I won't make this one." He picked up the phone and called the head of the company's IT and security departments. "I need you to come to my office right now," he ordered. "I need you to trace where these documents came from. I want to know who made them and who sent them to me. I need to know everything." The security team worked fast. Within a few hours, they had their answer. They found the old computer Mr. Harrison had used and traced the entire operation back to him. When the head of security presented the findings to Julian's anger was cold and final. He called Mr. Harrison into his office. "Mr. Harrison," Julian said, his voice like ice, "I know everything." He gestured to the report on his desk. "I know what you did. You didn't just try to fire an employee. You tried to ruin a good person's life with lies. You have no place in this company." Mr. Harrison's face turned white. He tried to argue, to deny it, but it was useless. Julian had the truth. Julian fired him on the spot. Later that evening, Savannah was working late, and Julian was still in his office. He walked out to her desk. "You know," he said, "when I found that dollar, I felt a strange sense of purpose. I thought I was just returning something small, but I was getting something much bigger in return. I was getting my perspective back, and my faith in people. You have that." Savannah smiled, her eyes shining with tears of relief and happiness. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, "for believing in me." He looked at her, not as his employee, but as the kind, strong woman who reminded him of what truly mattered. "Call me Julian," he said. "We're not just boss and assistant anymore." The single dollar that had been lost was now a promise of a new life. A life of justice, friendship, and hope. A life where a lonely billionaire and a struggling woman found something they both needed: a second chance. Thank you so much for watching and being a part of this journey. We hope this story of love and hope has touched your heart. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, remember that every lost dollar can lead to $1 million discovery.